Hi guys, what's the point in inviting Boris Johnson onto your show if you're not going to hold him to account? So of course he was on the Telegraph podcast and he was able to get away with blaming immigration numbers and inflation on the pandemic. And of course there was no mention of the other B word, not Boris, but Brexit. Have a listen to this.
The problem we had with the back end of COVID, though, was that it looked as though, and we couldn't see the numbers, we were flying blind, and we couldn't see how many were coming in. All we could see,
which is weird. The Home Office should have the numbers.
They didn't. No, they're not in real time. They don't.
No.
They're not, and so all we could see was inflation. So by the end of 2021, beginning of 22, inflation is suddenly getting into double figures. And you know what? That's a very, very bad.
Yes.
And that one, it was. I think the Treasury basically believed that was being caused by. Partly by the labour market seizing up, and people couldn't get a pair of hands to do the jobs that they needed done, and there had to be a fix for that. Otherwise, I assume. I mean, I'm just trying to analyse it in retrospect because this was not something that the government set out to do, and we certainly didn't set out to have 200,000 Ukrainians. We simply set out to be as generous as we could. Now,
oh my goodness! So he's trying to blame it now on the Ukrainians. No mention of the B word, of course, Brexit. So the problem was, or maybe the advantage the Conservatives had, was Brexit and the pandemic happened around the same time. So they were able to blame a lot of the economic fallout of Brexit, of course, on the pandemic, saying, the problem was we had to lock down, or the problem was that we weren't able to have people come into the country like before. So, of course, businesses were not able to operate as before. And businesses were not able to access the workers they needed. So, of course, what did this do? It drove up wages. Because, obviously, if you can't find staff, you have to pay higher wages to attract those staff. So you had the double whammy of the pandemic and Brexit. But, of course, the Conservatives, including Boris Johnson, were pointing their finger at the pandemic. Now, what they did was, of course, eventually was to issue more visas, but they didn't issue more work visas, they issued more student visas. And what happened, of course, was people were coming in with on student visas, and they were eventually bringing their families with them in many cases. So this, of course, drove up the immigration numbers. It's not so many people coming to work, it's more people coming to study. And then, of course, taking others with them. And then eventually the Tories realised this and they shut that down. Now the Labour government is going along with this as well, which is making it more difficult, ironically, for people to come in via a legal route. So some people are actually coming in via the small boats. Because once again, if you shut off a legal route, they'll have to take an alternative. Now the numbers are not significant, but they are rising. But once again, no mention of Brexit. What did Brexit do? It ended freedom of movement. So instead of relying on European workers, well, businesses had to rely on workers from further afield. And as we know, a lot of these workers were taking dependents, taking their families with them, because it was no longer a case of just jumping on a plane and taking a 2-hour flight to Britain. It was more like moving from the other side of the world to the UK to work and probably stay, and stay for the rest of their lives. So what the Tories are trying to do now is resurrect the idea that, look, immigration numbers went up. Yes, we can't avoid that reality, but it's nothing to do with us. It's all down to the pandemic. And of course, inflation was rising, nothing to do with us, all down to the pandemic. And you can even see here how Boris Johnson is trying to blame the Ukrainians. It's the war in Ukraine drove up the prices, and it did. But when you're in power, you're supposed to put in measures to protect consumers. You're supposed to put in measures to protect citizens. And of course, the Tories didn't want to do that. It was not in their ideology. It's all free market capitalism for them. If people die, if people suffer, well, that's the consequences of living in a so-called free market society. Boris Johnson needs to be properly held to account. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen at the Telegraph. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.